Charlie, and I'm also one of the psychological wellbeing practitioners at Brent. I'll go do that.
Oh, where are you going? You okay?
Yeah, I'll just give it a call.
Oh, so today we'll be covering grief and loss. Shall I try to wait?
Yeah.
Shall I begin? Shall I wait? I don't know. How is everyone doing? Yeah. I think I prefer this side.
Huh?
I prefer this side.
Okay. So we're here to kind of give you a bit of a talk on grief and loss. Some of you might have attended some of the previous sessions, which is great because some of the stuff that we will cover you'll probably end up remembering. But what we want to talk a little bit about and have an open discussion with you all is how grief and loss impacts us and how we all process grief in different ways. But also what comes with that and the different kind of difficulties that can impact us whilst we're grieving or whilst we're experiencing a loss.
So I guess it just goes into the kind of mental health difficulties people experience. There is a bit of stigma still attached to that. So sorry. People do find it really tough to talk about this stuff, and actually the more we normalise it, the better it is. But like it says there, 1 in 4 people do experience mental health problems, and it can be for any reason, but mainly for what we're covering today. And there's no shame in talking about it, and I think the more we open up that space, the better it is. And like my colleague said, we will be covering stuff that we've probably done before, but just kind of touching on it a little bit because it does directly link in with mental health problems. So when we are going through something that is quite traumatic, we don't necessarily have the time to take care of ourselves and actually look into, how we're going to process that and all of our emotions, because it's not something that we kind of grow up learning anyway. So when it comes down to it, it feels very strange for us. And I guess it can be reduced by actually starting to take care of ourselves. But how do we do that? It starts with thinking about, what it is that we're experiencing to start with. So some people experience depression. That is one of the main ones, just feeling really, really low. Some common symptoms are low motivation, sleep problems, feeling really tired most of the times, lacking from social interactions, negative thoughts as well. And all of these, when they start to impact your functionality and your day-to-day, that's when it feels like, the symptoms are a bit more prone and at the surface. So that's one of the major ones. And again, 1 in 5 people do suffer from depression in their lifetime. It can persist over 2 weeks, so that's when you feel, okay, I need to be doing something about this. Again, stress then kind of links in with the depression as well, so the more low we feel, the more it starts to kind of impact on our day-to-day, and then we start to feel like the demands are kind of outweighing everything else going on in our lives. It can be, the feeling of feeling really tense, nervous, anxious, feeling that uncertainty as well. Some people feel really fearful and they feel all of these emotions that might be quite new to them. It can affect your quality of life as well. Again, very much similar to the depression, but in this case, it's kind of focusing more on the demands of our life and how all of the responsibilities have outweighed the fact that we're taking care of ourselves. So sorry. The other one is panic attacks. So that is almost, another major symptom of all of these. So it can feel like a sudden, intense feeling of anxiety. And it can start to feel like, you feel really disorientated, you can feel really shaky, you can have heart palpitations. Basically, the worst case scenarios kind of run through your mind when you are experiencing panic attacks. So it's just your perception of the world changes in that moment. Regardless of whether the situation is dangerous or not, we would perceive it as being dangerous. Again, for some people it can feel as though they're having a heart attack, they're having the worst thing in the world, they might collapse. Things like that are very kind of common symptoms. And most panic attacks do last around 5 minutes to half an hour, but it can feel like it's going on for a longer period of time, although it's lasting a short period of time. So that's another symptom. And then, sorry, I'm just running through these because we have touched on it in the past, so I don't want it to be like a repetition. But again, stress is what I was saying earlier, the demands kind of outweighing everything else that we're doing. So coping strategies can be things like, going out for walks, doing things to take care of ourselves. And when that starts to kind of outweigh, I mean, the demands start to outweigh the coping strategies, that's when you start to feel that stress a little bit more. That pressure of daily life as well. Again, just a bit of a picture of what that can look like. So all the symptoms are basically there. We did go over the stress bucket last time, and what that is all these triggers are the things going on around us, and they're like kind of going into that bucket. So seeing that bucket as ourselves. Now all these triggers are going in, and everything else that's kind of reducing the stress, there's no way of kind of it going out because we don't have enough of that. So actually we're filling the bucket, but there's nothing going out of that, and that basically shows what a stress related scenario can look like. And again, like unhelpful coping strategies, everyone's coping strategies look very, very different because we're all very different. So like I said, some people might start to want to kind of make time for themselves, and that will look very different. So it can be going out for walks, talking to a friend, doing a hobby, maybe painting, exercising, whatever it is. That would be coping strategies. And an unhelpful way to cope with these things, although we think in that moment we're doing these things to cope with what we're feeling, is not making time for yourselves because you're thinking, oh, I've got all these demands, all these responsibilities, but actually I don't have time to maybe go out for that walk. You might be thinking that's helpful for you in that moment, but in the longer run it's actually an unhelpful way to cope with that stress. Avoiding things, and in that moment again it can feel fine because now we've avoided that thing that was making us feel anxious, but in the longer run it will just pile up and it will get worse. So again, there's some other ones there. Some people use alcohol as a way to cope as well. In the moment it can all feel like we're doing the right thing, but in the long run it's about building those habits, building those things that can be helpful for us. Again, some people start to worry a bit more when they're going through something, when they're going through a traumatic event. Those worries can be two different types of worries. So one of them is practical worries, things that maybe have solutions to them. It's just about, for example, even something like paying a bill. It might be a worry, but it's something that, you can sit there and actually come up with some solutions for. Whereas hypothetical worries are worries focused on the future. They may be, the what if thoughts, what if this happens? What if I'm late? What if I don't do this task properly? What if I don't meet this deadline? So things like that are more hypothetical worries, more future related. And no matter how hard we try to think of a solution there may never be one. So different types of worries there, just to keep in mind for when we do have worries enter our mind. They can be very uncontrollable. So we don't have much control over what kind of goes into our mind. It's just about recognizing which kind of worries we have as well. That can be like the first step in feeling better.
Okay. Thanks for the quick speed run. So I guess what we're here to talk about is grief and loss, and some of the things we covered, those can come with grief and loss. I wonder whether, I don't know if you have, is the chat online? Or is it just people watching? Just watching, okay. I guess I'm relying on the people that are in person. But is, from your own experiences, or even from what you know of experiences of people around you, what kind of things do you kind of associate with grief and loss? What are some of the symptoms, or even some of the things that we may go through during this period? And this is open to anybody in the room. Yeah, so we kind of think a lot about the person that we lost, remembering them, And does anything else come with that? Yeah. Yeah. Anger and guilt. Do you mind kind of explaining a bit more about what you mean by that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You might even experience guilt around what you had done or shared with that person, or what you haven't had the chance to do with that person, or maybe regrets. Aside from some of the ones that are on the board, is there anything else that you can think about that comes with grief and loss?
Become risk averse.
What do you mean by that?
In my situation, I won't do anything dangerous anymore.
Okay, so you become more aware of potential dangers around you. Yeah, I think, and that can also come with a level of anxiety around potential dangers as well, kind of like what Arusa was mentioning earlier. We then might have a lot of worries around what the future may look like. Is there anything else that you guys can think of aside from this? So we've kind of covered the main ones, which were like the worry, the anxiety, the guilt, the missing of the person, the agitation or the anger. I think what we maybe haven't touched upon is maybe some of those physical symptoms of loss, things like loss of appetite. We might notice a physical pain in our heart, or maybe we notice actually other physical symptoms that are happening in that moment. What I'm curious about is, how do we then cope with grief, or how do we go through the process of grieving? Again, please don't share anything that you're not comfortable with, but is there anyone who may have experienced a loss or know someone who's experienced a loss, and what did they do to cope in that moment? Helpful or unhelpful? Cried it out, talk it out. What about the opposite end of that spectrum? Yeah, some people prefer to bottle it all up, or maybe they isolate themselves from support networks. Sometimes we notice, like, in the immediate kind of period of grief, people lose appetite, people lose sleep. They may say things like, the person came to me in a dream, it disturbed my sleep. Or maybe, they might do a lot of kind of reminiscing of the person. Are there any other coping strategies that you think people may use to get through this difficult time? Yeah, no, if it's unhelpful, still feel free to share if you feel comfortable.
You lash out at people.
Yeah.
You lash out at those that are trying to help you.
Yeah.
You quite chatty, quite nasty.
Yeah.
Because it makes you feel that for that instant a little bit better.
Yeah.
But the long-term problems mount up.
Yeah. So sometimes it might be like a reaction wanting to kind of be in your own space of grief, but as a result you end up pushing people away. Maybe in that space we're also not processing, all the information very well, and it might feel as if someone's coming with maybe an intention that, is more unhelpful than helpful. If we just move on to the next slide. I think, and from my personal experience of loss, it's a roller coaster of emotions. It's never just, we go downhill and then we're up again. Actually, some days you'll feel okay, other days you actually won't. And other days, certain things are more triggering than others. Some days we remember the person, and other days we remember the memories, and it just goes through an up and down phase. I think often we kind of feel grief and sharing information or sharing our feelings about grief because everyone expects you to get over it, or it's been a period of time, surely you should be okay by now. But that's not necessarily the case for everybody. Everyone goes through their own kind of way of coping with grief. It's not just one size fits all, unfortunately. And sometimes when we share these experiences and people don't respond in the same way and say, this is something I resonate with, we then start to feel we're strange. There's something different about us, or we're doing something wrong. I personally believe there's no wrong way to grieve, because everyone does it in their own way. It's not just our emotional well-being, though, as we spoke about, it's our health. We might notice that our health starts to deteriorate as we stop taking care of ourselves, like Arusa mentioned. We notice the changes in sleep as well. And as I said earlier, it's quite common when we kind of say we can see, hear or feel our loved ones again, or maybe they've come in a dream. If we just move on to the next one, I guess this is what I was talking a bit about, where we think about like the way grief works. It's not just it's not just a straight line of feeling better. it's an up and down, and throughout each of these points we can get symptoms of different things. So initially we might have that extreme sadness, extreme low mood, because we are in the phase of processing. Maybe later on down the line we might get really anxious because, say for example, it was one of our elderly loved ones who passed away. We then start to worry, would it happen to someone else? Who is next? What if this happens? We start to worry about things that are out of our control. Sometimes when the initial loss happens, we can get the sensation of shock, and that can also lead to symptoms like panic attacks. It's really common to experience this, but also later down the line, we might notice maybe we've suppressed our grief because we've been busy doing other things, funeral preparations, prayers. We might be busy, doing things for the family, supporting other loved ones around us. That actually, that initial high intensity comes slightly later on down the line when you've had the opportunity to process that information. If we go to the next slide. Actually, can we go back for a sec? Sorry. I guess you guys have all attended this workshop for a reason, and I wonder whether there was anything in particular that you were hoping to get out of this space, or anything you wanted to ask, because it's more easier to have this as an open conversation rather than us just talking at you.
This is why we just sped past everything. This is more of a discussion so that we can interact and we can answer anything that you have.
I guess, is there a specific part of grief or loss that doesn't make sense to people, or doesn't seem to, maybe if you're supporting someone who's experienced grief or loss, something that you've struggled with?
Sorry, you learn to manage it.
And I guess that in itself is its own process, right? Because you go through ups and downs of trialing what works, what doesn't work.
And that indicates that it's something completely new to you. So you're still, processing how to even do that in the first place. So that itself will take a lot of I'd say courage. I think it's really brave to then talk about how you're feeling, and what you said earlier about the anger and the agitation that comes out. It's a bit of a domino effect. It starts with maybe bottling up some things. Maybe you've not spoken about some things, which is fine. At the beginning, it can be very, very normal, but it's just about learning that process. And everybody's got their own. There's no right or wrong. Like my colleague said, it's just one of those.
I guess when we think about processing loss, what primarily comes to mind? What kind of things do you think about when it's supporting somebody who's processing a loss or who's grieving?
Listening to them?
Yeah, that can be, I think, one of the biggest things you can do, and the most supportive things that you can do for somebody is just being an open ear, whether they need to be angry, whether they need to be upset, whether even in this moment they just want to enjoy their life and be grateful that they're here. And maybe that comes with a sense of guilt as well, and being open to listening to that. Sorry?
You feel judged by society.
So the stigma.
Yeah, the stigma. What in particular? You probably don't like me right now because I keep asking you to expand.
If you act on enjoying yourself, people say, why are you enjoying yourself?
Yeah. I guess.
When the opposite. Or the opposite.
Ah.
Sadly, what does that show though? Sadly, that it shows that we can never please everyone, unfortunately, whether we're doing one thing or another. It's a very common thought to come up, because I think, especially with me, coming from that background as well, it can feel like you're being judged all the time, oh, you're just not doing anything right. But actually, like we said, there's no right or wrong here, and it's all kind of almost unfortunately outside noise. But it's about learning how to manage that within us. And grief is, especially when it's quite new, you don't actually know how to go about it. So it's just about taking that one step at a time, It's not about speeding past just the way I did at the beginning, not speeding past the whole process, but just taking your time with it.
I guess when we're thinking about society judging us, are we also thinking about like culturally you're meant to be doing this during a specific grieving period? Culturally you're meant to be behaving in certain ways and it doesn't fit with everyone's views. Is that what we're kind of getting with? Okay. But yeah, there's also the opposite. If you've grieved too long, why are you still grieving? Get over it. But that's not the way it works. It's not the way that we as humans work, and everyone takes things at their own pace. So we can't expect people to either speed up their grieving or slow down their grieving according to what works for you. You're unfortunately not part of this process, and you know, especially when we experience losses perhaps within our families, you may have noticed that everyone kind of does things slightly differently or responds to the grief quite differently. And yeah, I mean, you know, some people can, they seem okay. Other people are, you know, outwardly not feeling okay, but we're not sure what the processes are going on behind everybody. Not everyone is going to share that process either. One thing in which I guess we can think about doing is this little exercise here. And it's about kind of giving somebody a space to grieve. So this is the tell your story exercise. Essentially, you kind of write out, or you give them a space to write out these things like who passed away, how did they pass away, you know, was their death expected, was it unexpected? What would your loved one want for you now? That's a big one. Because like we were saying earlier, you know, there's that stigma around if you enjoy yourself. People are like, well, you know, this, that, and the other. But what if your loved one did want you to continue life, to enjoy yourself, to go to that event? Or maybe you're thinking about, you know, who can support you as you grieve. Maybe you don't want to turn to everybody. Maybe it's just one specific person who feels like they really get it. And I guess the thing is, when it comes to a loss, it's like, and maybe some of you relate, some of you don't, and maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like a stillness in life at that moment. It feels like everything around you is just happening, but you're not actually in that moment. And coming out of it is thinking about what direction do you actually want to take life in? Where do you want to go from here? Because you, in a way, you want to kind of ask them, what do they need? Where do they want to go from here? Do they need a space to process this? There are some great services actually out there that offer specific bereavement support. I don't think there's a slide on that. I don't think there is a slide on it, but we can definitely write them down for you, or like send you guys the list. But there is like, I think bereavement support has closed.
Yeah, they're not taking any more referrals at the moment.
There was a couple that I had. I did have a list. So
there is definitely a list. Yeah, we'll send it over for you guys to have a look at.
But there's services you can reach out to. There's drop-in services that you can reach out to. It just kind of depends where you feel you need the support. And again, there's no need to rush for that support either. The initial month is the hardest, because that's when you've kind of gone through almost like a mini cycle or phase in itself, and you're kind of coming out the other end, but you need a bit more time. And so it's okay if you're in that, you know, that first moment you think, I actually don't want to reach out to anybody, but perhaps later on it's helpful to know that there are services available and there's people willing to listen to you and to support you. Is there anything?
Not on here, no.
Okay, so I guess it's a bit about open Q&A. I know there's not many of us, but more than happy to kind of take any comments or questions or anything that perhaps we've not covered that you think would be helpful for us to talk about.
Or if you don't feel comfortable saying so now, you can always come up to us then. It's not a problem at all. We'll be around.
If you want us to go back a couple of slides, we can also do that. if you really want to see the stress and depression work again, I'm more than happy to review that as well. I guess with this period then, what about like the other kind of mental health difficulties that can arise after? What do we think about those? What are our thoughts around supporting somebody who maybe after a period of grief is actually experiencing anxiety or depression? How do we then support this person? Do you guys have any suggestions?
I think it's quite important to establish how do they want you to respond to them. Like what's their coping mechanism? So you can tailor yourself to that. Maybe they want you to listen, maybe they want you to speak to them. But if you don't know what they want, you can't particularly help them.
Okay. How would you approach that conversation then? Because that's where the challenge is, right? You kind of want them to be able to feel they're able to speak to you. So how would you then approach this person?
I think if someone is able to confide in you, you would assume that you've got some sort of relationship with them, or you've got some sort of understanding about them, you know them. So there might be a way that you've been able to pick up how they've faced struggles in the past or how they've processed trauma in the past. So perhaps you might have a understanding of what they already want. Not to say that this could be completely different, that they might want another way to cope, but I think that could be a good foundation to then figure out what they want from you.
100%, yeah. I think especially if you've, as you said, you've got that established connection, kind of letting them know this is a safe space for you. The one thing is we don't want to judge anyone either, and giving them that non-judgmental space and saying, look, hey, come to my house, have a cup of tea, say what you want to say. If you're angry about the loss, say you're angry. If you're frustrated at the way, because I know, like from personal experience, like Hindu funeral rites are very stressful. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who turn up. You know, perhaps saying it's too much. I can't actually deal with this amount of people in my face all the time, and I'm struggling to process the loss. That in itself can be actually a really helpful space for them, just to kind of give them a place to break off from everything and just to feel as if they can not necessarily offload, but they can kind of let themselves be in that moment. Is there any other suggestions as to how you'd support someone who maybe had like anxiety, depression, even panic attacks during this period?
Maybe get them to write something down. Could be simple questions. How you feeling?
Yeah.
And then sort of try and branch it out. If they say depressed, okay, so what making you depressed? Why? Etc.
Yeah.
Small talks, you know, to build up what's happening.
100%. And even I guess when we're thinking about like writing, something that might help is writing letters to the loved one, and maybe, you know, kind of either expressing the frustration with it, expressing the grief, the loss, but maybe a way to kind of have a space for closure. Something which I find really helpful when we're working one-to-one with patients is that we kind of talk about how to reconnect with your loved one with an activity, because often after the grief period we do get the kind of heightened depression. We do notice ourselves avoiding a lot of anxiety, a lot of activities. So one of the things we may be thinking about is, you know, is there anything that I used to share with this person, whether it be a meal, whether it's an outdoor activity, whether it's a movie, is there anything I could that we shared that I could then use to connect? Even if it's something really small, like we used to take a walk to the corner shop. Why not? If you can do that, if it feels manageable, start with the smaller things. That way, you might find that it's slightly, I'm not going to say the word easier, but it becomes slightly easier to cope with the fact that the person is no longer there, because you're still reconnecting with them to some extent. Has anyone kind of tried or spoken to somebody about strategies like this to help them with this period? Or does anyone think it's a terrible idea and that I should leave the room? Is there anything else that we could do to kind of help ourselves connect with our loved ones even after they've passed away? Sorry?
I've got people talking about it.
You got people talking about it?
About them.
About them, okay.
So, was it they say people die twice? Once in real life, and secondly when people forget them.
Just to keep that remembrance going, like keep something without them.
That's an important thing, particularly for me, because it was my partner, and for my girls, it was their mum. So one of the things that we made very clear, right, quite early on, was don't be afraid to talk about, my wife, she died. Don't, she had her hilarity, she had her moments, she had her stupidities, she had her loveliness. Rejoice in that. Remember them, get annoyed sometimes, but also don't forget her. So, for me, that was an important thing that, she was a private person, but she touched a number of people in their lives, and for them to talk about her is actually quite an important thing.
Yeah. And I guess people avoid it for a number of reasons, right? As well, we avoid it because we don't want to upset other people, or maybe we don't want to upset ourselves talking about it, but or about the person. But it's actually really important, and it sounds like it was part of your journey in grieving, and perhaps that was such an important part to keep her memory alive. And it could be the same for other people as well. And I'm glad you shared that it's important, because I guess it's such a touchy topic. Sometimes people are so avoidant of talking about grief, about loss with other people, because they're afraid to upset them. But perhaps what people want the most is, I don't want this person to, as you said, like die the second time around with the memories, want to keep the memories alive. I think that's a really helpful tip. Thank you.
It's a really good way of keeping it very open and giving your girls that open space as well. That's quite a big deal. Even if they decide not to talk about it in that moment, at least they know they can, and that's quite big. That's a huge thing.
The other thing we talked about was writing to them. That's quite powerful. You keep them alive.
Yeah.
And if there's someone like a parent or your partner or something, that you have that connect with them is quite important. So, like a diary, I guess, just feeding back.
Yeah.
And I think, I did actually join a bereavement group, talking therapy group, and one of the things that we talked about was having a toolkit, or a grief toolkit, and it was just a few ideas that we as a group developed, and it was that thing where different, you don't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail, you don't use a hammer, but you need a spanner type thing. So you have a number of tools in your kit that you apply in different ways, and you don't know when you'll need each one. So having it in that toolbox was the important thing, so that you could utilise it as and when. So that was quite powerful. It was a powerful phenomenon, I guess. Because I was using it, but we weren't naming it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
But now you can put it together, which is
when
really nice.
when we were talking and we put it together, that was quite an important thing. That having that set of tools, and I think we'll develop as we go along.
And like you said, you were in a group, so when you were sharing ideas, it's almost like, oh, that's a good idea. Let me put that in my toolkit. So it's good to open up that space and then talk about it and be like, okay, what is it that you do that maybe I can start to do, or maybe I can even think about. Before you know it, you'll be doing those things without actually labeling it and thinking about it because they're there. Yeah, that's quite good.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.
And I guess, like Marissa said, the toolkit idea sounds absolutely great. And I guess everyone's toolkit, I mean, you probably have, a bit more insight, but did everyone's toolkit look slightly different? Did everyone's toolkit?
We added to it.
Okay.
Because, we all at different stages of our grieving. There's also understanding that one day the span might work, the next day it may not.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a wave, isn't it? It's not a straight line. Everybody does it differently. And it's okay if you have a good day and then the next day you have a bad day. It doesn't mean that you can't get back up, but it just means you're still going in waves and it's still coming at you.
I guess just to let you all know that even at the Talking Therapies, we do kind of take referrals in for grief and loss. Again, you kind of probably remember this from when we spoke last time, but you can kind of, with the referral form, you can sign up to our service either online or via your GP. And I guess it's also to share with your friends and family, especially if you've noticed that someone perhaps is struggling and may benefit from some support, to gently kind of say, look, there's this service, they are here to support you. There's no pressure, but whenever you are ready, if you do need somebody to speak to, they're there. But you don't necessarily need to also come through us, because there are drop-ins there.
I was actually going to touch on that earlier, that's such a common thing we hear, like the time is a healer, but actually it's what you do with that time that kind of, I wouldn't say 100% heals you, because that's something that nobody else can understand, that what you're going through, nobody else will be able to like kind of fit themselves into that. But it's just about making that toolkit, that coping mechanism, as much as you want to get rid of that framework of what you can do. But if in that time you're just grieving and you don't actually know where to go and who to speak to, it can start to get worse. And it's just about making sure we have that kind of built-in coping mechanisms, like, or even just speaking to someone about how can I help myself in this moment, what can I do, like it doesn't have to be something major. So yeah, personally I don't agree with that completely.
They once did, and it's made me laugh. And again, it will go through waves. It won't be like every memory from a certain point onwards is going to be positive, and it's not going to make you tearful, or you're not going to feel sad or low in that moment. But each kind of phase will come with its own, I guess, its own challenges, but its own rewards at the same time. Again, like, you can't really tell anyone how to grieve, because everyone just goes through it so differently. And it's kind of, I think the most important thing is with grief is to be kind to yourself in that moment, because no one is ever going to understand what you feel, because your connection, no matter how far, how close, is different to the other person that's sat next to you. So you can't really compare your experiences, you can't really compare those feelings, because there will be different memories, different feelings associated with this person. So that process is going to look really, really unique for everybody. And I don't think it's, in one way, it's not anyone's place to say, this is how you process grief, because I won't know. We won't know. But what we can do is kind of help you with that, toolkit. And like Carissa said, like creating that bit of a toolkit to help you with coping in those more challenging moments.
Something someone said that was really powerful that I remember is, and yes, it can apply to grief and loss, but it can apply to so many other things. It's actually going right through it. Like, whatever it is that we're experiencing and whatever it is that we're feeling, sometimes we tend to avoid that, and that's perfectly fine. It's just about not running away from those emotions as well. I think a lot of the times just facing them head on, and as difficult as they are, maybe not straight away, but at some point getting in touch with that and being like, oh, okay, this is how I feel. I don't feel very good, or I feel very sad, but actually accepting that's how you feel in that moment, and that's okay. And then again, remembering to be compassionate with yourself as well, because if this was a friend speaking to you and telling you, oh, this is what I've been going through, you'd say all these lovely things to them, but we find it so difficult to do that with ourselves. So yes, it's okay. There's going to be days where you're going to feel really, really low and really sad, and you're going to miss them maybe more than any other day. But it's about knowing that that's okay. It's okay to feel that way. And then maybe tomorrow you can start with something else. You can start building that toolkit for yourself. But it's going to be very different. Every day is going to be different.
Is there anything that anyone else wanted to add on to this conversation or touch upon? I can imagine that you probably all had really long days at work and you want to go home. So if you would like to speak to us kind of more privately, we're more than